Today we're looking at the story of Zacchaeus. It's the opening story of the 19th chapter of Luke. Now, this is also the second last story before Jesus heads into Jerusalem and Holy Week happens, and we know where that's going. So Jesus has rock star status by this point in time, and he doesn't care. He really doesn't. It doesn't matter to him who he's upsetting at this point in time. He knows what's ahead. He's already accepted that. So he's heading through Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world, still historically the oldest city in the world, and he meets up with this man named Zacchaeus. Now, there's a few things going on here, and I think it's really something that we're having this reading on the day that's also All Souls Day. All Souls Day is kind of forgotten in the 3 day sequence that makes up Halloween, All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, and All Souls Day. All Saints is famous for a number of things. One is that's the day that Martin Luther decided to put his 95 Theses on the door. So it's also called Reformation Day, or Reformation Sunday is the closest that comes to. He was intending for people to see it because they were coming to the celebration of All Saints. And All Saints comes from a bishop in the, I don't know, 5th century maybe, that bring all saints together because every town had had their saints, and the church at the time gave holidays for every saint day. So if your calendar is full of saints, then that's a whole lot of holidays. So to appease the upper class, which is often what church institution does, they combined a lot of saints all together on one day. So we still have individual saints that are kind of like uber saints, where those days are marked, but everybody else was kind of coalesced into this one day, All Saints Day. And then All Souls was for everybody else. So everybody who didn't do fantastical things, everybody who wasn't seen as particularly holy, average folks like us. So today is All Souls Day, and we're reading about the story of Zacchaeus. Now, the story is not a parable. It's actually a story of experience. We've been having a lot of parables going through, and this story kind of harkens back to the one from last week where we were looking at the tax collector and the Pharisee being so sanctimonious and considering he was so fantastical that God would give special benefit, whereas the tax collector at the time, who didn't have a name, stood there and humbly said, I'm broken. I'm not worthy to be here." So now we have a story of an actual tax collector, and do not assume that the two stories go together. They don't, but there's a theme in there, a theme that follows through the Gospel of Luke, which we first meet in the Magnificat, where the high will be brought down and the low will be brought up, and the kind of an equalization of what's going on in the world, in God's creation. So we have Zacchaeus, a man, we're told, in short stature, climbed up in a tree. There's a wonderful children's story that goes, or children's song that goes along with it, that every time I read this passage, I can still see my mother in my mind singing this gleefully with the Sunday school classes that she taught. So we have Zacchaeus up a tree. He is a tax collector, we're told. So that tells us a number of things right off the bat. First of all, he works for the Roman government. So the tax process in that day was they had a set number of taxes, and then whoever the tax collector was could put their own on top of it. And Rome just turned a blind eye. It wasn't seen as corruption, it was just seen as the way business was done. So that's how tax collectors got really rich. That was also why tax collectors were vilified in the community, because they were exploiting people to get their wealth. We have a tradition that Matthew, the Apostle Matthew, was a tax collector. So he was also the one in charge of the financial purse with Jesus' closest followers. So we have this man who is an outsider, who we have identified in the scripture also as a sinner. And remember, sinner is someone who has separated themselves from God and separated themselves from their community. Not the modern kind of take about this kind of, whoa, I'm not good enough kind of thing, although Zacchaeus does allude to that. That's not what the word meant when the Gospel of Luke was being written. So we have a very self-aware person, short stature, wealthy man, who wanted to see Jesus. Something had changed in him, and he wanted to talk with Jesus about it. So when Jesus is walking by, crowds following around, everybody trying to cozy up and be the ones that got in near to Jesus, Zacchaeus calls out. And Jesus notices and turns around, calls Zacchaeus by name, which is very interesting because in the Gospels, very, very few people are given names. The few that are very significant, and the history of our church has been to kind of conflate them when we shouldn't. Zacchaeus has no other, there's no other Zacchaeus that conflates with this one, but Jesus knew his name. So either his reputation was also quite huge, or, things that we don't understand, and Jesus knew who he was. So Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down here. Get off the tree and come down here. So Zacchaeus does. And Jesus says, by the way, I'm coming to your house. Yeah, I'm going to stay at your house. Shock. Jesus is essentially in the crowd of all of these people who want to have some kind of special connection with them, chooses the person that the community vilifies, the person who's an outsider. And we hear the bitterness of the community, like he's going to a house of a sinner. How dare he kind of pick him over me? You can see the tone there. People are so self-righteous. This is kind of where it harkens back to that parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. People are quite assured that the way they live makes a difference. It does and it doesn't. And that's kind of the bottom line in all of this. Zacchaeus needed something significant. And we've talked about this in the past. I've shared the story of being in the bathroom and being quite pregnant with my first child and not being able to get out to comfort a young woman who couldn't understand why the woman going back to a challenging, negative country would get some overt vision and she didn't. I wasn't able to tell this young woman that she didn't need it. She was in a safe community. She'd already have an affirmation. It harkens back to the prodigal son, where the son comes back and everything seems to be about him. And the father tells the son, it's always been you and me. We've always been there. There's not a divide between us. You know what you're inheriting. It's there. But this guy got wise, lost his way, found his way. We have to celebrate that. Lost sheep, lost coin. There's theme through here. And Zacchaeus is just the latest in the theme. When we are people who live decently, who try to live by the tenets of God, who try to live by the social gospel, it might be easy to feel that we don't matter, especially when something big happens to someone who has been lost, someone who has been on drugs and finally gets clean, an alcoholic who has found AA to be something that can sort them through, the person who has experienced incredible abuse in either their family or their community or even their church, and finds a way to reconcile that, kind of heal the pain, and move forward. We make a big deal of that, and it's very easy to see that or feel that if that's made a big deal of, then something else isn't. The healing miracles. Why is that person worthy, but my person who was even more faithful didn't receive that kind of miracle? We struggle with that. I don't have the answers for that one, quite frankly, but there's a pattern here of those who need to see God most. See God in their moments when they are vulnerable and they are ready. And that's the lesson that Zacchaeus tells us. No matter how much the community might grumble, they miss the fact that this is a moment between God and Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus says, I'm going to give half my wealth. And anybody I've defrauded, I'm going to give them back 4 times as much. I promise you, God, right here and right now, I'm reformed. I'm going to be different. I want to follow your tenets. That's a conversation that the people in the community aren't owed. It's not on them. When they see it happening, when they see the results of it, when they benefit from it, they can probably look back and say, oh, this kind of makes sense to me. And there will be a renewal, hopefully, of community, because ultimately that's the salvation for sin that we talk about. This it's salvation is not this kind of American Christo fascist kind of version of the next life, and so everybody suffers this life because the next life is better. That's not salvation. Salvation is when we can build community back together, when someone who is lost is found, when someone is restored to right relationship with both God and with community. And that's what we have here in the story of Zacchaeus. Now, what does that have to do with All Souls Day? Well, we're all on that journey, especially those who have struggled with their faith along the way, or those who have found their faith and they thought they had lost it and were quite okay with that, but something happened and it brought them back in. Zacchaeus tells that story. Other stories in Luke and the other Gospels tell that story. And there's a moment of connection and a connectedness with the Gospel, with Jesus' teachings that is astounding. And those around watching it don't have to get it. They don't have to, they're not part of it. It doesn't matter if they understand it or not. It's not about them. But outsiders, the people around certainly have an opinion, and they will certainly weigh to see whether an epiphany has happened, and judge, because that's what humans do. But ultimately, that moment is not ours. It's not inviting us in. We are the crowd left outside, and that has to be okay, because we're following our faith regardless. We're doing what we believe is right regardless. And that is the role of the souls. Nothing is going to stand out. They're not going to write hymns about us and poems about us and prayers about us. The lucky one might get a kind of a local nod. But the souls are the majority. And we are the ones who continue moving forward, who warm seats, who serve at soup kitchens, who do the things and don't have a major encounter that makes us have an aha moment, or we fall away so badly that we can't get back in. Zacchaeus, never going to be around the saints, doesn't seem to care. He wants to be in right relationship with God. We hear his story as a lesson to us, not as something grand for him. He doesn't even talk about thanking God for what happened, just promises how he's going to be better. On this All Souls Day, take a beat. Take a minute to recognize if you have not had a major religious experience in your life, it doesn't mean anything is wrong. That's something that I had to come to long ago in my own journey, when I would hear other people, especially if you're part of a community that does witnessing. You almost want to outdo. There's a English play, I think, where the three men are sitting on a bench and they're trying to outdo each other. Christians kind of fall into that, trying to outdo each other with our faith experience, and some of them get really pathetic and some of them get really inventive. But that's not of significance to the group of people. We don't need to have a bad faith story to have a faith story. Sometimes we really are just boring and going along and doing our thing and being the people God called us to be. Some of us get that learning and that message really early on. Zacchaeus didn't, but he got renewed. The community around, we don't know much about them, but they were not the ones that God needed to talk to that day. It's okay if we have very few encounters with God ourselves, because we're always living in the presence of God. God doesn't have to call us out and have that special experience. So on this All Souls Day, relax into your faith for one day. I know I don't usually tell you that, but for one day, relax into the simplicity if that's where you are. If you have had a faith journey that actually calls out and calls something big to happen, or a big change moment, or a turn moment that takes you in a different place, that's okay. That's part of your story, and that's fine. And that's something you can always point to. It's a wonderful experience to have that encounter where we have to want to change something about ourselves, and it's big, and it's an experience. But you too are the souls. All of us are the souls, no matter how our faith journey looks. We are all included. This triumph of days, Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls, it's to include all of us. This is a time of year to just kind of sit and enjoy the fact that we're following God's message and share what that looks like. And if that means just sitting back in a rocking chair on a porch, that is perfectly fine.